Nightcrawler is a 2014 thriller written and directed by Dan Gilroy. Lou Bloom is an unemployed thief who desperately wants a career. He doesn't have a proper education, but has kept himself informed through online courses and reading self-help articles on the internet. No opportunities present themselves until he stumbles upon a car accident and a man who is filming it to sell to the local news. Lou hires an assistant, Rick, and starts his own two-man production company that sells exclusively to one station. He uses his influence to force the news director, Nina, into a relationship, severely injures his competition, and rises to power through horrible, amoral tactics, all while justifying his actions as a proper business plan. Lou enters a violent crime scene before the police even arrive, filming everything. He sees the suspects leave, but purposefully hides their identities from the detective in charge of the case. He follows them, waits until they are in a crowded area, and only then informs the police of their whereabouts, in hopes of filming graphic violence for the news. Lou gets away with his lies and furthers his production company, gaining incredible success at the cost of the life of his assistant and several police officers. The cinematography in the film is guided by first-time director Dan Gilroy, but also Academy Award-winning cinematographer Robert Elswit, known for his frequent collaborations with Paul Thomas Anderson. The lighting and framing for this shot tells us a lot.
I'm focusing on framing. A proper frame not only draws the eye into a picture, but keeps it there longer, dissolving the barrier between the subject and the outside of the frame.
In this scene, Lou is shrouded in darkness, symbolizing his life up until this point. The television is the only bright glow in his home. It is his salvation and also his future. The framing of Lou's interactions with other people often include profile shots. Profile shots suggest that the character is hiding something, or that not everything about him is yet known to the audience.
What if my problem wasn't that I don't understand people, but that I don't like them? What if I was obliged to hurt you for something like this? I think you'd have to believe afterwards, if you could, that agreeing to participate and then backing out at the critical moment was a mistake.
The pace of Nightcrawler is meant to create tension, suspense. From the point in the film in which Lou and Rick park their car, call the police, wait, discuss morality, watch the shootout, and engage in the car chase, we are watching the action in real time. No transitions, no time lapses. We feel as though we are part of the action due to the pacing. The point in which Lou parks his car until the fading transition after Rick's death takes 12 minutes and 27 seconds of one real-time scene. It's not a one take or anything, there are lots of cuts, but it's still a long time to be strapped to the action, and Nightcrawler does it perfectly. Lou shouts for a wide angle for their news footage. A wide angle creates a larger depth of field. Lou learns proper cinematography over the course of the film, and in doing so, his explanations also provide the audience with an understanding of not only how his videos work, but how this film works too. Lou and Rick use zoom cameras, common in television production, to switch from tight shots to wide shots instantly. This sometimes results in a loss of quality over cameras with prime lenses, or fixed focal lenses.
Yes, from the camera up there. Wide angle.
So, who is Lou Bloom? On the surface, to the public, he is superficially charming. In private, he is violent, uncaring, unsympathetic, dishonest, and always believes he is in the right, even when it is clear that he is not. When he sets up his assistant, Rick, to be murdered, he justifies it to Rick, while smiling, as a necessary step in his business plan, and also reasonable retribution for Rick daring to ask for better compensation.
I can't jeopardize my company's success to retain an untrustworthy employee.
The problem with psychoanalyzing a character in a film has three layers. First, we are given only a brief glimpse into their lives, usually about 90 to 120 minutes. Second, diagnosing a mental disorder can be challenging, as misdiagnosing disorders with similar traits or symptoms unfortunately happens all the time. Memoirist John Elder Robison recounts in his book, Look Me in the Eye, that he was misdiagnosed as a sociopath at a young age because doctors were not entirely knowledgeable about autism yet. Thirdly, accurate portrayal of mental disorder in film relies heavily on the screenwriter's knowledge and can sometimes lead to public misinformation about mental disorders. The most common explanation of Lou Bloom is that he has antisocial personality disorder. It is characterized by a pattern of disregard for other people, complete lack of empathy, arrogance, overestimation of their self-worth, and a superficial charm that is largely a facade. Bloom clearly exhibits these traits. He has no regard for the feelings of Nina, the woman to whom he is attracted, or Rick, his assistant who he eventually sets up to be murdered. not to mention allowing many others to die so that he can record the carnage. He is arrogant and often overestimates his abilities, constantly telling people that he is a fast learner, and when they forget that, he reminds them that he has already mentioned that, as if it were very important information. However, there are examples in the film that suggest this diagnosis may be inaccurate. Those with antisocial personality disorder suffer from an inability to learn from experience and change their behavior based on past outcomes, or predict future outcomes. Bloom, on the other hand, is able to learn from past mistakes and become more successful. So, does he truly have antisocial personality disorder? It's difficult to say, but the film does contradict this diagnosis, as it shows Bloom's rise to success. The film never explicitly gives a psychiatric explanation of Bloom, never talking about his frontal lobe or anything like that, and that's probably for the best. Misrepresenting mental illness in film can lead to widespread misunderstanding of those who suffer from such disorders, even demonizing those who simply were born into something they can't fully cure. Nightcrawler walks that line between showing a dangerous character and completely explaining his disorder. It's an important distinction to make. Jake Gyllenhaal's portrayal of Lou Bloom is a great example of dedication to acting. His insight into the character tells us a lot. Quote, "Young people have been taught what the idea of success is. It's a society of succeed at any cost. When do we decide that we've been successful in what we've done? Is there ever a point where that happens? Jobs are redefining themselves, and you can find work in the strangest of places. If you have empathy, then I think you know how to navigate that in a way that's not going to hurt people. But if you're a character like Lou, it's dangerous." Unquote. Gyllenhaal's thoughts on the character aside, we need to go deeper. Where does Lou Bloom's personality come from? We can speculate about what exactly his mental disorder truly is, but the way he talks and acts is rather distinct. Part of this is due to Jake Gyllenhaal's impressive performance, but it also comes from the story itself, and clues given to us about what has created this human being. Everything Bloom says sounds like it is entirely rehearsed. He speaks not as a functioning member of society, but as someone reading a speech, imitating a real person.
Who am I? I'm a hard worker. I set high goals, and I've been told that I'm persistent. This is a custom racing bicycle, sir, designed for competitive road cycling. This bike has a lightweight space-age carbon frame and handlebars positioned to put the rider in a more aerodynamic posture.
Bloom confesses to Nina that he does not have a formal education. He claims that he spends all day on his computer, learning new information, reading articles, and sometimes taking online courses in subjects he feels will help him excel. If his mental disorder makes communication with other people difficult, his window into how to speak, the internet, further damages any possibility of talking and behaving like a normal person. He speaks in business jargon, as if he were quoting the gospel. He recites these facts and statistics without understanding the human elements behind them.
And they've found that in any system that relies on cooperation, from a school of fish, say, or even a professional hockey team, for example, these experts have identified communication as the #1 single key to success. My motto is, if you want to win the lottery, you have to make the money to buy a ticket. You know what FEAR stands for? What? False evidence appearing real.
If Bloom's understanding of the world comes from online business courses, dubious self-help books, and other resources on the internet, he may not even understand business ethics or even how to function in society at all. Bloom tells a manager that he regrets that he is part of the self-esteem generation. Thematically, Nightcrawler is a subversion of the rags to riches feel-good movie with an emphasis on showing the holes in such fables, breaking down where power, fame, and wealth actually derive. The commonalities and tropes of such films usually involve an underdog who grew up poor, unfairly subjugated into a life of poverty and mistreatment. But deep down, the underdog is more skilled and clever than those who oppose him, and he earns their respect. Then, through sheer will or some kind of magic, the underdog turns everything around, wealth and power are granted, and everyone lives happily ever after. Films that show wealth and power eventually corrupting the underdog, leading to his downfall, pop up from time to time. Martin Scorsese has made a career of them, but that still falls into the category of those in power getting their comeuppance, because the underdog is now the one in power. But Nightcrawler takes the most hopeful and even childlike qualities of the rags to riches stories and crushes them. One such element is that of the triumphant music, declaring to the world that a new hero has risen. Some have claimed that the soundtrack to Nightcrawler is not dark enough, but that may have been the point. In this scene, triumphant, inspiring music is juxtaposed with Lou Bloom recording a disaster. It's loud enough that we notice it and understand what the scene is trying to say, but it's not so loud to become comical. In a normal rags to riches film, this is the scene where the hero decides what his quest will be. Sometimes this is some form of montage, but it could be any moment in the story when the music swells to saccharine heights and lets the audience know who to root for. In Nightcrawler, we are actually tricked through common film tropes and music to hope that Lou Bloom is a success, even though, by this point in the film, we know he's a criminal and a highly questionable person. Also, take a look at this scene. This is right after Rick has been murdered by Lou's design. This is a close-up beauty shot, a romantic image with passionate music, but in the background, we still see footage of Rick dying. The film is making us choke on this, letting us know that Bloom's success came with a price. It's not subtle, but it doesn't need to be by this point in the film. We're at the end, and everything has reached its peak. So why was the traditional character arc for these sorts of movies removed? Director Dan Gilroy explains, quote, "Usually the arc is that the world creates a change in the character, usually for the better. To not have an arc, the messages and ideas in the film became more prominent. The character is plowing through boundaries and keeps going, so the boundaries become very clear, the things he's crossing, and the focus on it is the world bending morally to what he's doing. At the end, allowing him to succeed at what he has done and celebrating his success, raising questions. What does it say about us that we allow something like this to happen?" Unquote. A few times during the film, we see that Lou Bloom has flowers in his home, what appear to be lavender. Lavender is often used in aromatherapy, again a form of self-help outside of the mainstream. The flowers represent Lou's growth into what he wants to become. On a few occasions, he is seen watering his flowers. The connection between himself and the growth of his flowers is noticeable, as his last name is Bloom. Not very subtle, but it does the trick. He even lies to the police about how he falsely remembered the identities of the suspects.
Could you tell me how it is you were at the Chinatown Express tonight and call the 911?
Of course. It began earlier in the day. I was watering my plant.
In short, his flowers are not only a connection between their growth and his growth, but also his ability to lie. Movies sometimes have symbols or representations of the character as objects that parallel their own story, usually in a positive way. But in Nightcrawler, the connection between the lavender flowers and his lies subvert not only the classic rags to riches story, but also a classic rags to riches thematic element. Speaking of symbols, a portrait of a Native American is shown in Lou's apartment, signifying that Lou believes that he has been mistreated by those in power and forced out of what he believes he is entitled. Of course, the Native Americans have a case, and Lou is simply delusional. So, with all of this in mind, what does this mean? Why poke holes in the classic rags to riches story? What is the film trying to say? At its core, Nightcrawler may be rooted in our misconceptions about what makes a great success in America or any other capitalist country. There is a saying, behind every great fortune, there is a great crime. That old saying, combined with director Dan Gilroy's assertion that we allow bad people to rise to power because of what they give us, appears to be the essence of Nightcrawler. He has said, quote, "I believe that people like Lou are increasingly rewarded for what they do. I feel that in today's world, you will often find people with some sociopathic tendencies who are succeeding on a corporate level. I feel that the world is increasingly about the bottom line and not so much about human respect or human dignity. And I feel that the world is increasingly reduced to transactions and that the human spirit is shoved aside to the point that, well, Lou understands that the world is about the bottom line." Unquote.
I'm looking for a job. In fact, I've made up my mind to find a career that I can learn and grow into. Who am I? I'm a hard worker. I set high goals, and I've been told that I'm persistent.
In short, Nightcrawler is about capitalism. Suggestions from critics that Nightcrawler is a condemnation of the news media is at best a half-truth. There are certainly instances of showing the local news station to be corrupt and amoral, but the film is about what drives that amorality. News stations competing with one another for audiences and for money. The idea that integrity and dignity are no longer factors when journalists are struggling to survive in the changing modern climate of news, and the exploration of what they are willing to do to keep a job.
Will this be on television?
Morning news. If it bleeds, it leads.
The best and clearest way that I can phrase it to you, Lou, to capture the spirit of what we air, is think of our newscast as a screaming woman running down the street with her throat cut.
Unfortunately, there really is no easy answer to this. The opposite system, state-run media, has its own share of problems. Nightcrawler digs deeper into ruthless capitalism versus acceptance of an ordinary life in this scene. Lou and Rick are in the car, and Rick notices a Bed Bath & Beyond. He jokes that it's a great store, and that life is really about, as he puts it, making peace with what you don't have. What Rick says here is important, because it's the exact opposite outlook as Lou Bloom. In fact, Lou and Rick are purposefully made to be opposites. When our protagonist first meets with Nina and asks her what she is looking for in news footage, she says this.
We find our viewers are more interested in urban crime, creeping into the suburbs. What that means is a victim, or victims, preferably well off and white, injured at the hands of the poor or a minority.
When Rick is first introduced to us, he is homeless, unemployed, and destitute. We can also see that he is an ethnic minority. In other words, he is Nina's target of profiling, a poor minority that, as she says it, is creeping into the suburbs. When they get footage of a stabbing in Corona, Nina is upset and doesn't want the video. Although it isn't explicitly stated in the film, Corona is an ethnically diverse area. Nina also says that she isn't interested in crime in Compton, which is a heavily African-American neighborhood. This is an acknowledgement of racism, but it has less to do with Nina's feelings or social politics, and more with her acceptance of how the public sees things and what would be best for her career, her business, and her continued employment at the station. Another problem compounded by ruthless capitalism and competition. And so, Rick, a victim of profiling, becomes a different kind of victim altogether. Again, there is no easy answer to this, and the film does not claim to have one. In fact, in all of its philosophical explorations, Nightcrawler does not pose a definitive solution to society's ills. It's probably better that way, or else Nightcrawler would risk becoming more preachy than exciting, and the latter can sometimes have a greater impact. Hi everyone, if you like what I do, consider clicking on the orange Patreon link below. That's how this show happens. It's also a way for you to request an episode.